Hi, I'm Kate Zullo, Head of Education here at the Litchfield Historical Society. Now, at this museum, we tell a lot of really interesting stories, but one of our most popular collections is definitely the papers of Litchfield's Benjamin Tallmadge. Everybody wants to know more about George Washington's spy master. So, we are going to spend all month investigating his life, covering everything from his service during the war to his time here in Litchfield. Perhaps what makes him so popular is that during the Revolution, he, quote, this is a quote from his autobiography, opened a private correspondence with some persons in New York for General Washington, which lasted through the war. Of course, what he's so humbly referring to is his organization of the Culper Spy Ring, a network of informants that gathered and moved information about the British Army in New York and Long Island. So I thought it would be fun if we started by recreating how that Culper Spy Ring worked. And to do so, I've raided a few toy chests and pressed into service some Playmobiles. Now, I do know that some of their costumes aren't historically accurate because they are toys after all. But I think we can have some fun with them. So do you think we should get started? What do you think, Tallmadge? Should we get started? Definitely. Let's start by getting a lay of the land. Connecticut is controlled by the Patriots. Meanwhile, the British headquarters are down here in New York City. The British also control a lot of Long Island. And General Washington over here, well, he's gonna move around a lot, but for today's exercise, I'm gonna put him up here on the Hudson River at a place called West Point. For Washington to get the most accurate information about the British Army, he's going to need to put a man in New York City. And that's going to be this man, Robert Townsend. Robert Townsend was a merchant and a coffee shop owner. And it just so happens that his coffee shop was very popular with loyalists. So we can imagine Townsend going about his daily routine, serving cups of coffee to the British, meanwhile listening in on their conversations. Or perhaps he goes down to the docks to check on his warehouse, and while he's down there, he just happens to see how many British ships are in the harbor. And of course, if while collecting this information, he's stopped by a British patrolman who asks him who he is and what he's doing, he can answer quickly and honestly. After all, he is a merchant and that's where his warehouse is. And he is a coffee shop owner, so it makes sense for him to be there. This way, Townsend can collect all this information about the British without arousing any suspicions. Once Townsend has collected the information, he needs a way to get it to George Washington up here at West Point. He can't simply leave the city and head up the Hudson River, because if he was stopped, that would look very suspicious. So he has to stay in New York City and have somebody come and get that information from him. That's going to bring us to the next person in this spy ring. This man here is Austin Rowe. He's a tavern keeper here in Setauket, Long Island. He often has to go into New York City to get supplies for his tavern. And we're gonna make his carriage go without a horse today. And of course, who does he go to buy supplies? You guessed it, Robert Townsend. Austin Rowe visits Townsend, he gets supplies from him, and hidden within those supplies are going to be the secret dispatches. Once he's loaded up his wagon, he can turn around and head the 50 miles back to Setauket. Now, if he gets stopped along the way by a British patrol who asks him who he is and what he's doing, again, he can answer quickly and honestly. After all, he's Austin Rowe and he's a tavern keeper. He often goes into New York City to buy supplies. Nothing suspicious. Once back in Setauket, Austin Rowe would pass the information on to Abraham Woodhull. Abraham Woodhull was a local farmer and head of the Long Island spies. He went by the code name Samuel Culper Sr. So here we are with the information in Setauket, but we still need to get it all the way to George Washington at West Point. And you'll notice we're separated between Patriot-controlled Connecticut by the Long Island Sound. So we're going to need a boatman. That's going to be Caleb Brewster. It would look very suspicious if Caleb Brewster was constantly going to visit Abraham Woodhull to see if he had information for him. So instead, they're going to use a signal. And to do that, Woodhull enlists the help of his neighbor, Anna Strong. When Woodhull had information, Anna Strong would do her laundry. And she would hang a black petticoat to let Brewster know that the letters had arrived. She would also hang handkerchiefs to let him know which cove the information was hidden. Once Brewster had that information, he would carry it across the Long Island Sound, where he would meet either a courier or Tallmadge himself. Finally, that sensitive information is out of British-occupied Long Island and safely in Connecticut. From here, Tallmadge would pass that information about British troops and supplies on to George Washington to help him devise a winning strategy. In the 5 years that the Culper Spy Ring operated, they gained some really crucial information for George Washington and the Continental Army. And what's even more impressive is during that whole time, not a single one of these spies were unmasked. So you may be wondering, what was it that made this spy ring so successful? Well, one thing is the fact that they prioritized keeping the flow of information secure over speed. You probably noticed how long that trip would have taken to get from New York all the way out to Setauket, to cross the Long Island Sound, and then all the way back to wherever Washington was. But they prioritized making sure the information got there and going slow, than trying to go quick and not getting there at all. The other thing that made this ring successful is the fact that these are all regular citizens. Abraham Woodhull and Austin Rowe, they're not trained soldiers. They're not even trained spies. They were just ordinary people who took on this extraordinary risk to help the cause. And we're going to be looking more at the techniques that Tallmadge used to protect their information as well as their identities. So make sure you tune in next week when we take a look at some of the letters that Tallmadge wrote to George Washington. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Goodbye.